Buongiorno, buonasera, benvenuti amici. Welcome my friends. My name is Vincenzo and welcome to my channel. And the channel is Fountain Pen Therapy. And you know what? Fountain pen therapy, well, it takes three ingredients. As we know, it takes a pen with a beautiful nib. It also takes some ink that we prefer. And you know what? We sometimes underestimate how paper can make all the difference. What I propose to you in this particular video is I'm going to do a detailed comparison. I'm going to use, swatch, and sample with three different pens, some of my favorites, and we will look at, 8 different types of paper. In fact, we will take my TOMOE River paper original, and we will compare it to 7 other notebooks and paper, and we'll declare a winner, at least my winner. So stay tuned. Let me just explain. It's Sunday morning, 7 o'clock. As I usually do, I go down to my studios and I start playing around with my pens to try to get as much fountain pen therapy to energize me for the rest of the week. Amongst other things, we do our videos, we do our reviews, we take a look at some of the YouTube videos, etc., etc. Drink my cappuccino, and I'm always writing. So in that vein, I decided that I wanted to do a more in-depth comparison of why, an explanation perhaps to my viewers as to why I insist on TOMOE River paper. And so to that end, I said to myself, why don't I do a detailed comparison? So what I'm going to propose is that I'm going to do a comparison between TOMOE River paper original, COSMO Airlight, SANZEN TOMOE River, bank paper, CLAIREFONTAINE, RHODIA, MIDORI, and IRPOFUL. So that's what I propose to do, and try to do that in a way so that you can appreciate why I prefer TOMOE River paper, but maybe, given the descriptions I will give you of the writing experience, you may very well prefer one of the other notebooks that I'm comparing in this short video. So, without any further ado, let me go to my overhead camera and we'll do the first set of comparisons. Okay, here are my tools. First of all, I'm going to take this Sailor King of Pens. The reason why I've chosen this pen is that it has that very, very unique chalky feedback experience. And I want to compare what kind of chalkiness, if you will, this King of Pens or this Sailor nib will give first of all, in these 4 notebooks. The second pen that I want to use, forgive me, I thought I'd taken it out already, is this fine Homo sapien. I've chosen this because this is in essence, a typical, very nice, fine nib. Writes fine, but is smooth. less feedback, and doesn't have that sharp, unique sound and experience as the King of Pen. The third pen that I have chosen is this Asvine J16. This Asvine has a Yowo steel broad nib. Chosen it for two reasons. One, it's a steel nib, so we can get a steel nib comparison. And it's broad, so it'll give me a big juicy line. And I want to see how that big juicy line translates itself. And the nib is extremely smooth. It's a broad, so it's got a big, big nib, big point, tip, and it smooth, gushy, wet. So we'll see how that translates itself. If I can get my camera to cooperate, we'll take a look at a closer look with this magnifying glass, and maybe I'll use another one. We'll see, to see how the very very close up look at the writing samples. So those are my tools, and without any further ado, let me start. Okay, so we're all set for the first comparison. The first four notebooks. So first of all, we will work with the Sailor, King of Pen. I'm going to identify the paper at the top of the sheet. So this is the TOMOE, I should say, and you'll forgive me if I say Tomo. TOMOE River Original. And this is the Sailor, King of Pen. First of all, extremely smooth. I'm not fighting the paper at all. The paper, the ink just glides. There is a hint of there's a hint of chalky feedback, which of course is unique to the King of Pen or to Sailor nibs in general. It is very wet, and the line is very thick. I would say, just an excellent writing experience. Now, let's compare it right away to, we'll put the original Tomoe River aside, and we will take the SANZEN Tomoe River. Just 1 second, I'm going to get my guide sheet that I forgot to insert here. Okay, my apologies. Here we go. This is the guide sheet that comes with the Galen leather products. Okay, so let's identify the paper. The paper is now, I can tell you right away, it is smooth, but I find myself fighting the paper. What I mean by that is the flow has roughness. can't describe it. It's not scratchy. It's just rough. It's like writing with little beads of sand. The feedback is always there. It's still chalky. The line, I would say, is wet, but slightly thinner as compared to the original TOMOE River. Okay? And it's that peculiar roughness that disturbs me when it comes to this paper. But, you know, you can tell when you compare it that the line here is just so much smoother and thicker. Okay? But having said that, okay, let's put that aside now. We'll go to switch notebooks. Let's do COSMO Air Light. Now, COSMO Air Light has, in the past, also been slightly rougher paper. Whoa, let me get my guide sheet. There we go. So this is COSMO Air Light. And I realize that this paper appears to no longer be in the market, but, you know, I think there's enough stock out there to warrant the comparison in any event. Very smooth. I do feel the chalky feedback. Now, it is more, that feedback is more than original, but less than the SANZEN. Again, very wet paper, and thickness, I would say it almost equals that of TOMOE River original, and greater than SANZEN in terms of line. So the flow is somewhere in between both of them. Okay, so that's COSMO Air Light with the King of Pen. We'll put that aside and go out and get, okay, let me just remove that. There was a stain on it. We will put in the guide sheet. This is the bank paper. So this is the bank Yamamoto. Sailor. Flow and the guide and the glide is more than the TOMOE River paper original. It's very, very smooth. Almost, you can tell my handwriting, I'm having a hard time controlling the flow. So the flow is much higher, okay? It is just as wet, if not wetter. The line may even be thicker than the original. Now, you see this right here? Kind of a shading. That's not the pen. Sometimes I see this paper being very sensitive to skin oils, a little bit like COSMO Airlight, where if there is a botch of the oil from your skin on the paper and you write over it, there may be a kind of a skipping. It will, it won't penetrate the paper. So very nice. That's essentially the Bank Yamamoto. So if we look at the King of Pen, we're talking about Yamamoto first, a little too glidey, if you will. Then comes the TOMOE River Original. Then comes the COSMO Airlight, and finally the SANZEN. So there again, depending on how you like the writing experience, you adjust yourself accordingly, correct? If you like that kind of rough glide or feedy back glide, then of course you may want to choose the other papers as opposed to TOMOE River. Now let's do the Visconti. The Visconti, the Sailor King of Pen was a medium. So this is a fine. So it's a smooth, soft glide. Very little feedback, even with this fine nib. It's a wet line. Okay. And it's fine to perfection. In other words, it doesn't make the fine line thicker nor thinner, if you will. I think it exemplifies a true fine line, and again, Western fine, not for example, Japanese or even Chinese. Okay, so that's TOMOE River Original. Next one, let's take a look at TOMOE River SANZEN. I don't know if you can hear that. So it is wet, but the line is much finer. Take a look. Let me just put them side by side. You can see it's much darker, wetter, and thicker on the original than it is on the SANZEN, and it's sandy. The feedback is very, very different, and I find myself almost fighting the flow. Okay, so that's Tomoe River SANZEN. So again, I'm getting a very similar profile or pattern there, even with this fine nib. This is a COSMO air light. I don't know if you can hear that. Again, it's a softer feedback. It's more than the original. By original, I mean the Tomoe River original, but less than the SANZEN. The line is wet and it's thicker than SANZEN, but slightly thinner than the Tomoe River original. So again, it's falling somewhere in between the SANZEN and the Tomoe River. Even the ink is lighter. The other thing, of course, is that, but we'll take a look at that later. Okay, so let's put COSMO air light aside. Let's go get the bank paper. Now, typically, if the pattern or repeats itself, we should have normally a thicker, smoother line with this bank paper. Let's see if that's what happens. Well, you see it skipped. And that's not the pen. There again. I found myself having to press a little harder. So, skippy. Flow is smooth, but it's almost as if the ink is not penetrating the paper. No, well, let me take that back, because maybe I'm running out of ink. Just bear with me. Yeah, I think I had to open up that second chamber because that's the system this has. So in all fairness, why don't we start this all over again? Yeah, okay. As I suspected. Because it does have this skin oil issue, but I didn't think it would have been that drastic. So again, this is the flow is smoother, thicker, wetter than the Tomoe River original. And it almost writes like a medium. Compare it to, see the difference. Even the ink comes down differently. Okay, so that's that. So that's the Visconti. Now, let's come back and do sorry about this. Let me just put everything aside here. Okay, now we're going to do take this broad nib, Yowo broad nib in this J16 and see what gives. Okay, so this is the Asfine J16, and it's got this Yowo broad. I mean, it's so smooth, there's no feedback. Perfect glide. Very wet. Very, very wet. Okay. And it is wet, and it is a nice glide, but not an uncontrollable glide. Let's go to my SANZEN right away. Smooth, slight sandy, you know, that roughness that I feel in the paper, but not as much as the fine nib and the Sailor King, but much more feedback than TR original. As to the line, well, you can see it. It is definitely wet. No doubt about it, but thinner than the TR original, to the point where it's writing like a, not like a broad, but like a medium broad. And find myself fighting a fighty flow. And because of that, on the other hand, is that I see more, not line variation, but shading in the ink on the SANZEN than I do on the original. It's like the ink is having difficulty penetrating the paper at various spots, so that your line will look darker and lighter as you go along, whereas it's a little more consistent with the Tomoe River. But there again, if you appreciate that and like that and do need that little bit of feedback, then maybe you're better off with the SANZEN. I just find it's an unnatural flow, unfortunately. Now, I'm expecting Cosmo Airlight to be just in between the two. Let's see if that's the result I get. Well, a second. Sorry, my line, my guide sheet. There we go. So this is the, yeah. You see, I'm getting a broad line with no feedback, but with the shading that one would appreciate in, you know, in this type of ink. Definitely wet and thick. So I would say that the line is even thicker than the Tomoe River original, and no fighting. Good flow. Now here again, you got to be conscious. I just saw a little bit here, right here. Cosmo Air Light has been known also to be very sensitive to skin oils. That's why I'm trying to keep my fingers away from the writing area, which is, you don't want to worry about that when you're writing, right? So, but having said that, you can definitely see how thicker it is, but you get to appreciate that line, or that ink shading, if you will, that you don't see as much on the original TOMOE River. So let me get my guide sheet, and now we'll do the bank paper. Okay. So this is the Asvine J16 broad nib. It's thick, wet, but slippery. So too slippery. Where almost again you get the sense that you're gliding on a little bit of water, and the ink is not penetrating. At least that's the sensation you have. And the line, I would say, thicker, the thickest of them all. So, here we have it. Now, just give me a second. Kind of want to put them all one side by side, and adjust my angle, and I'll be right back. Now, when I look at the writing with and it's difficult for me to capture that on video, and I don't want to go through the loops, but I can tell you that there is no feathering at all on the TOMOE River. Okay, it's the line is very curved and perfect. There's no feathering. There is a little bit of feathering on this bank paper, but again, I need to use a magnifying glass to see it. I could see that the paper, the ink, reacts a little more wildly on this bank paper because it's slipping all over the place, if you know what I mean. So it doesn't have a nice crisp line. On the TOMOE River SANZEN, on the contrary, again, no major feathering, but you can tell that my line is fighting the paper. The line, my handwriting is choppy, if you will. On the COSMO Air Light, again, very little feathering, a lot more shading in the ink. And my handwriting, you can see, is definitely flows a little more similar to the TOMOE River original. So that, in a nutshell, is the comparison with these between these four notebooks. I hope I've kind of provided you with enough of a profile there to be able to, for you to be able to choose which of these you would prefer based on your preferred writing experience. So there you have it. I guess the next thing I'd like to do is maybe just flip over all this paper just to see what gives on the other side. Now, this COSMO Air Light is the thickest, of course, of them all. Second is this bank paper, and then these are the two TOMOE River. As you could see, I would say to you that you can all see, all of them give you a little bit of ghosting. I think that's, the COSMO Air Light is less than the rest, I would say to you. My TOMOE River is not bad. certainly less than the SANZEN. Having said that, I don't see any botching. I don't see any ink penetrating in the back. But of course, all these very good finish papers will always have a little bit of ghosting. So, if you don't like this ghosting, then you have to sacrifice the writing experience on the other side, of course, with a thick 120 gram paper that will not allow you to write on both sides without any hesitation, but that will just not give you the same writing experience. So there you have it. I know that in my notebooks, oftentimes, you hesitate to write on the back side just because some of the inks that are darker penetrate a little more. But having said that, that's, I think, the trade-off. You get the writing experience, but maybe some of the ghosting in the back. So there you have these four. Let me set up. We'll go get an additional 4 notebooks, I believe it is, and we'll do the second part of this comparison. Thank you. Okay. This is the original TOMOE River, and I've indicated, for the 3 pens, the writing experience. This is RHODIA 80 GSM. This is CLAIREFONTAINE. This is MIDORI, and this is IRPOFUL. Okay, so let's start with the sailor pen with this RHODIA paper. Okay. On this RHODIA, what I would say to you, it's smooth. You can definitely feel the chalkiness of the sailor nib, but it also sings. So it's kind of slippery, okay? And it's a very smooth and unique feedback. So other than the singing, it does bring out the best of this pen, if you will. Now, let's see what CLAIREFONTAINE does. I think that with this CLAIREFONTAINE, that chalkiness is transformed into a singing nib, not a singing nib to the extent that it may have a problem. It's just that it doesn't give me a very comfortable writing experience. It's not even singing. It kind of squeaks. So I'm not enjoying that writing experience, but it is smooth. It's not rough, okay? Not at all, because these two papers, kind of more like a coated paper. That's the sensation I have anyway. Let's see what this Midori does. Okay, look, all these papers are smooth and wet, but that's because the nib, is a fabulous nib. On this Midori, that squeakiness or that singing, much less in RHODIA, much more in CLAIREFONTAINE, is replaced with a kind of rough. I can feel the tooth of the paper a lot more, so it's not chalk anymore. It starts to get more bite, but it's not scratchiness. None of these papers, by the way, will make any of these pens feel scratchy. Okay, so it's just a little rougher. You feel you're fighting with the glow, with the flow. You're fighting with the paper. You can sense, you can feel the grain of the paper with this Midori. Okay? Now, let's see what IRPOFUL does. Let me just push all of that. Let me just go back to RHODIA for an instance. Yeah. I would say to you that the IRPOFUL feels a lot like the RHODIA paper. It's similar to RHODIA. You can feel the chalkiness of that nib, but with just a slight squeak. Not as squeaky as CLAIREFONTAINE, that's for sure. Very smooth and wet. All of them are very smooth and wet. And the line is pretty well even in all of the paper. I would say it's a little thinner on the IRPOFUL as compared to the rest, but otherwise you're getting a fairly even line. I would say comparable also to the TOMOE River, if you compare it the original. Okay, so that's that. Now let's see what the Visconti does. Let me just extend the microphone here. Okay. I'm getting a line that is much finer than the TOMOE River. It's like as if the ink is having some trouble penetrating the paper, if you will. So it's not as even. I can see more shading here in the RHODIA than I can in the original TOMOE River. It's also smooth feedback, but it's a lot more feedback on this RHODIA than there is on the original TOMOE River. Let's see what CLAIREFONTAINE does. Okay, so it's a sticky fight in this paper. Very uncomfortable feedback. It feels like I need to press in order to get the ink down. And a very light, fine line. But again, if you like a fine, fine line and less wetness with feedback, and all of this is smooth, don't get me wrong, then Clairefontaine may be for you. But I just don't like the writing experience with Clairefontaine. I can tell you right away, prefer much more the RHODIA experience. And I always thought these two were similar, but there's quite a difference. I would say to you that the Midori is in between these two. It's a much thicker line that if you compare it to the Clairefontaine. It's probably even thicker than the RHODIA, but you can feel the tooth. And I think we've established that with Midori, you're going to feel the grain of the paper, but the ink does penetrate, and it's a much darker and thicker line that I'm getting, and certainly much wetter than both of these. So there you have it. That's Midori. Let's see what IRPOFUL does. Okay. On the IRPOFUL, I would tell you that it is just as sticky as Clairefontaine without the squeak, but much thicker and very, very smooth and very little feedback. So it's got probably the thickest line, maybe as thick as RHODIA and Midori, if not thicker, but it's smoother than both both the RHODIA and the Midori, and it doesn't stick like Clairefontaine. I mean, it sticks like Clairefontaine, but it's smooth. But I feel like you got to push that writing experience. The glide is much less there. So if I would, in terms of glide, I would give this if I give this a 9, I would give this a 7. I would give this a 7 as well on 10. I would give, there's glide here, but it's rough. I would give this one 8 on 10, 7 on 10. So this one glides the best. But there you have it in terms of smoothness. Okay, so that's the Homo sapien. Let's go back and do this Asvine. No feedback. Thick line. It's wet. It's smooth and it glides. Let's give this one 10 on 10 when I compare it to the experience I had with the Homo sapiens. And now we'll do Clairefontaine. I mean, it's like I feel like the ink is not penetrating the paper at all. And I see skips. The glide is 8 on 10. It's still smooth and wet. But this very broad line, I don't see the ink. I see more of the shading. That's why you see a lighter writing here than you do compared to the RHODIA paper. Okay, I realized that it wasn't focusing there. Okay, let's do this Midori. With this Midori, I can, you can feel the grain, of course. You can almost feel a little bit, the roughness of the paper. The glide is 7 on 10, so it's got this characteristic of the ink not penetrating, similar to Clairefontaine, without the glide, if you will. So that's why I give it a 7 on 10. Again, I don't like the writing experience either in Midori or Clairefontaine so far. Let's see IRPOFUL. I don't know if you can see that, but there's some feedback here. Again, it's like the ink doesn't want to penetrate. It's not getting into the paper. The best so far is RHODIA, and the best of them all, of course, is my TOMOE River. I mean, the TOMOE River, with this nib, it's smooth. There's no feedback. You can tell that it's much darker than it is here. I don't like the way this thick nib reacted on the IRPOFUL. I prefer the IRPOFUL paper for thinner nibs than I do for thicker nibs. I can tell you that much. Do I see any? Let's just see if we see any feathering. No, but I could see how I'm getting a lighter, all the light shade of that ink is coming out. If you like shading in your handwriting, well, then you've got the right Then this IRPOFUL is really nice. By the way, right here, I've got a feeling that this paper, much like the COSMO, is sensitive to your skin oils. So because I put my finger there and some oil remained, when you write over it, it gives you that sort of a situation. Let me get rid of the light. I don't know if you could see that, but yeah, it's very choppy. Lots of shading in this ink, very little feathering. Again here, no feathering. You don't see feathering in this type of paper. The best one of them all, and the one that I would prefer, needless to say, is my TOMOE River. But I think that if I would have to choose between these four, definitely go with the RHODIA before the CLAIREFONTAINE, before the MIDORI, and before the IRPOFUL. I prefer the RHODIA over the SANZEN, that I can tell you. Much nicer writing experience here. And especially if you like a fine line, but with all the ink penetrating the paper, then RHODIA definitely is the one. Although I think the winner, without any shadow of a doubt, is the original TOMOE River. So there you have it in terms of writing experience. Now let's just take a look at what the paper looks like on the reverse side. It's the MIDORI. Okay, you know what? We can just, yeah, we can do that. Not a problem. Okay, here a full, I get to see a little bit of botching there. You can see just a little bit of penetration, and with my Visconti, which is a fine nib, so that's surprising. They all have a little bit, just a slight, ghosting. Most of the ghosting you see is in the MIDORI, I think, is the one that has the most. You have very little on the CLAIREFONTAINE and very little on the RHODIA. But as you can see, they're all very, excellent performing inks, paper. In that regard, I don't think you can really go wrong with any. I'm being very, very picky here. But, if you have to choose a paper, unfortunately, for me anyway, it's becoming clear that my TOMOE River is my favorite paper. So I've got to snap up as much inventory as I can to last me a lifetime. Trust me, I've got a lot, but I think I'm going to have to get more. So there you have it. I'm not sure that this is of any value to anyone, but if it is, let me know. But that's my comparison. Okay? Good. Thank you. Yeah, there you go. We compared what? 1, 2, 3, 4, another 3. That's 7. Yeah, we compare 7 different types of paper with the original TOMOE River paper. And for me, the outright winner is TOMOE River. But I got to tell you, if you use RHODIA, you're in good hands. You are in excellent hands. I'm not sure, frankly, that SANZEN, especially if the price considerations come into play, is worth it. I really am not sure. I've got to tell you right now, I would even go with bank paper before SANZEN. It may be a good thing to look at pricing as well, but I can tell you that all of this paper is very good. I can tell you the TOMOE River, unfortunately, is very expensive these days because we're running out. IRPOFUL is an interesting paper, but it's not cheap. MIDORI is probably the cheapest of them all, and if you like, feedbacky paper, grainy paper, then MIDORI is excellent because it doesn't feather, it's fountain pen friendly, absolutely. COSMO Air Light, unfortunately, is out as well. From what I understand, it's no longer being made. I would skip CLAIREFONTAINE, that's just my opinion, and SANZEN. Bank paper, to the extent that you could get it at a good price, and if you like thick line, then bank paper is good. But to me, we're looking at RHODIA and TOMOE River Original. That's it, folks. After that, bank paper. If you can get your hands on COSMO Airlight, go for it. If you want a cheaper paper with grain, it's MIDORI, IRPOFUL, CLAIREFONTAINE, and SANZEN. I would stay away from CLAIREFONTAINE and SANZEN. I just don't like those papers. I really don't. IRPOFUL, unfortunately, is just too expensive. You can get cheaper and better paper in the other alternatives. So there you have it. That's my comparison.